She was his intern and untouched, and the billionaire ruined all his rules for her smile. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew this elevator ride could change everything, but she had no idea how much. Arielle Jamieson clutched her worn leather portfolio against her chest as the polished steel doors slid shut with a whisper. The 42nd floor, Tiburon Holdings. The words gleamed in brushed gold letters on the panel, each one representing a dream she'd chased for 4 grueling years, through endless study sessions, part-time jobs and sleepless nights, fueled by instant coffee and determination. The city sprawled beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows as the elevator climbed, but Arielle kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. She'd practiced this moment in her cramped studio apartment mirror dozens of times. The handshake, the introduction, the perfect balance of confidence and humility that would prove she belonged here. 24 years old, and she'd never wanted anything more. The elevator chimed softly. Her reflection stared back from the doors. Pressed white blouse, charcoal blazer from a thrift store she'd tailored herself, hair pulled back in a neat bun that took her 3 attempts to perfect that morning. She looked professional, polished, ready. The doors opened to reveal a world of marble floors, modern art installations, and the kind of hushed efficiency that only came with serious money. The Tiburon Holdings reception area stretched before her like a cathedral of commerce, all clean lines and strategic lighting designed to intimidate. "You must be our new intern." The receptionist, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled warmly. "I'm Beverly. We've been expecting you." Arielle managed a grateful nod. "Arielle Jamieson. I'm so honored to be here." "Economics major, right? From Riverside Community College?" Beverly's voice carried genuine interest, not the polite dismissal Arielle had braced herself for. "That's impressive. We don't usually take interns from smaller schools." The word stung slightly, but Arielle had learned to transform doubt into fuel long ago. "I believe merit speaks louder than pedigree, ma'am." Beverly's smile widened. "I like you already. Come on, let me show you to the intern floor." As they walked through corridors lined with awards and photographs of gleaming hotel properties, Arielle absorbed every detail, the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with fresh flowers, the way conversations lowered when they passed, not from rudeness, but from the weight of important decisions being made. The distant hum of a city that never stopped moving filtered through windows that probably cost more than most people's cars. This was power, real power. And for the next 6 months, she'd be part of it. "The 20th floor houses our development team," Beverly explained as they passed another elevator bank. "That's where you'll be working. Market analysis, property evaluation reports, client presentation support. Nothing too overwhelming to start." They entered a smaller elevator, and Arielle caught a glimpse of herself again in the mirrored walls. She looked smaller here, somehow, more fragile, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, you got to work twice as hard to get half as much, but when you get there, you make sure they remember your name." The 20th floor buzzed with controlled energy. Young professionals in expensive suits hurried between glass-walled conference rooms. Computer screens displayed financial projections and architectural renderings of properties that would reshape skylines. Arielle felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly where she belonged. "Your desk is right over here," Beverly said, leading her to a workstation by the windows. "Nothing fancy, but the view should help with those long afternoons." Arielle set down her portfolio and looked out at the city below. From up here, the world looked manageable, organized, like everything had its place and purpose. "Mr. Damon Riker likes to personally welcome new team members," Beverly mentioned casually, checking her watch. "He should be making his rounds this afternoon." The name sent an involuntary shiver through Arielle's composure. Everyone knew about Damon Riker, the 37-year-old CEO who'd built Tiburon Holdings from a single property acquisition into a billion-dollar empire. The man who never smiled in photographs and whose business decisions were studied in her economics textbooks. "I'll make sure to be ready," Arielle managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Beverly patted her shoulder gently. "Just be yourself, honey. That's what got you here." As Beverly walked away, Arielle settled into her chair and opened her laptop. She had reports to review, presentations to understand, a whole new world to master. But as she began organizing her workspace with the methodical precision that had carried her through college, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift. The elevator chimed again in the distance. Footsteps approached across the marble floor, and Arielle Jamieson had no idea that her carefully planned life was about to collide with a man who would shatter every rule she'd ever made for herself, including the most important one: never let anyone get close enough to hurt you. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? And what if that force happens to be wearing a $1,000 suit? The silence that followed his entrance was the kind that rewrote the rules of the room. Ariel felt the shift before she saw him. Conversations didn't just pause, they evaporated. Keyboards stopped clicking. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. She kept her eyes on her computer screen, pretending to analyze market projections, while her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Footsteps, deliberate, confident, getting closer. "Good afternoon, everyone." The voice carried through the open floor plan like velvet over steel, smooth, commanding, impossible to ignore. "I wanted to personally welcome our new team member." Ariel's fingers froze over the keyboard. This was it, the moment she'd rehearsed 100 times. She lifted her head slowly, preparing to meet the gaze of the man whose business empire she'd studied, whose strategies she'd analyzed, whose reputation preceded him like a storm front. Nothing could have prepared her for the reality of Damon Riker. He stood 6 feet away, hands clasped behind his back, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire semester's tuition. But it wasn't the expensive tailoring that stole her breath. It was the intensity in his dark eyes, the way he seemed to see everything and reveal nothing, the quiet power that radiated from him like heat from a fire. "You must be Ariel Jameson." He stepped closer, extending his hand. "I'm Damon Riker." The introduction was unnecessary. Everyone in the building knew who he was. But as their hands met in a firm handshake, Ariel realized that knowing about someone and experiencing their presence were two entirely different things. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Riker." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, and she felt a small surge of pride. "Thank you for this opportunity." For a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Their hands remained connected. His grip was warm, solid, and something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find. "The honor is mine," he said quietly, and released her hand. "Beverly tells me you're from Riverside Community College, economics major." "Yes, sir." Ariel straightened her shoulders. "I know Tiburon usually recruits from Ivy League schools. I promise I won't let you down." A ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I didn't build this company by following conventional wisdom, Ms. Jameson. Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from unexpected places." The words hit her like sunshine breaking through clouds. All those late nights, wondering if she was good enough, smart enough, polished enough. And here was one of the most successful men in the country telling her that her difference might be her strength. "What's your assessment of the Hartford property acquisition?" he asked suddenly, nodding toward her computer screen. Ariel's mind raced. She'd been reviewing that file for less than an hour, but years of academic pressure had taught her to think quickly under scrutiny. "The location is prime, but the renovation costs seem underestimated. The neighborhood's changing demographic suggests we should consider mixed-use development rather than pure luxury residential." Damon's eyebrows rose slightly. Around them, the office had gone completely silent. Even veteran analysts didn't usually offer unsolicited strategic opinions to the CEO. "Interesting." He moved closer, studying her screen, close enough that she caught the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated that made her pulse skip. "Most people focus on the profit margins first." "Profit matters," Ariel replied, surprised by her own boldness. "But sustainable growth comes from understanding community needs. A property that serves its neighborhood will always outperform one that ignores it." For several heartbeats, Damon studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and seen at the same time. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made something warm bloom in her chest. "I think you're going to fit in just fine here, Ms. Jameson." He turned to address the broader office. "I want everyone to know that Ms. Jameson brings a fresh perspective that we value. I expect you'll all make her feel welcome." As he walked away, stopping to speak with other team members, Ariel realized she'd been holding her breath. The normal office sounds gradually resumed around her, but she felt like she was floating slightly above her chair. "Well, well." The voice came from her left, where a woman about her age with perfectly styled blonde hair was watching with amused eyes. "I'm Cassidy Walsh, senior analyst, and you, my new friend, just got the Damon Riker stamp of approval in your first hour. That's either really good news or really dangerous news." "What do you mean?" Ariel asked, still processing what had just happened. Cassidy glanced around conspiratorially, then leaned closer. He doesn't usually spend more than 30 seconds with new interns, and he definitely doesn't smile like that. Trust me, I've been here 2 years. I've seen him destroy grown men with less emotion than most people show choosing coffee. Ariel's stomach fluttered. I just answered his question honestly. Exactly, Cassidy grinned. Most people tell him what they think he wants to hear. You told him what you actually thought. Either you're incredibly brave or incredibly naive. Maybe both, Ariel admitted, watching Damon's retreating figure as he disappeared into the elevator. Just be careful. Cassidy's voice carried a note of genuine concern. Damon Riker doesn't do personal relationships with employees, ever. It's like his #1 rule, and trust me, women have tried. The warning settled over Ariel like a cold blanket, but she forced herself to nod professionally. I'm here to learn and work, nothing else. But even as she said the words, she couldn't forget the way his hand had felt in hers, or the moment when his smile had made her feel like the only person in the room. As the afternoon wore on, Ariel threw herself into her assignments with renewed focus. She had reports to analyze, presentations to prepare, and a career to build. Whatever she'd felt during that brief interaction with Damon Riker was just nerves and adrenaline. It had to be, because men like him didn't notice women like her. And even if they did, she'd learned long ago that fairy tales were for people who could afford to believe in them. But as she packed up her desk at 6 o'clock, she couldn't shake the memory of dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. And she had no idea that 40 floors above, Damon Riker was standing at his office window, thinking about a young woman whose honest answer had reminded him what it felt like to be surprised. She wasn't supposed to be there that early, but some habits were harder to break than others. Ariel pushed through the glass doors of Tiburon Holdings at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before her official start time. The lobby was empty except for the security guard, who looked up from his newspaper with surprise. "You're here early, miss." "I like the quiet," she replied, which was only half the truth. The whole truth was that she'd barely slept, replaying yesterday's encounter with Damon Riker, until every word, every glance, every second of that handshake was burned into her memory like a brand. The elevator carried her up in silence, and when the doors opened to the 20th floor, she was greeted by darkness and the kind of peace that only came before the world woke up. This was her favorite time, when she could think clearly, work without interruption, and pretend that her carefully controlled life wasn't slowly unraveling. She made her way to the small break room and started the coffee machine, a ritual that grounded her. The familiar sounds of brewing, the rich aroma filling the air, the simple act of preparing for another day. Normal things, safe things. "I see I'm not the only early bird." The voice from the doorway made her nearly drop the coffee pot. She turned to find Damon Riker leaning against the frame, looking impossibly composed for someone who'd apparently been in the office before dawn. His suit was perfectly pressed, his dark hair styled with precision, but there was something softer about him in the morning light, or maybe it was just the absence of the usual corporate audience. "Mr. Riker," her voice came out slightly breathless. "I didn't know anyone else was here. I've been in since 5:30. He stepped into the small space, making it feel suddenly intimate. "Conference call with our Tokyo partners. Time zones are a necessary evil in this business." Ariel nodded, hyper-aware of how close he was in the confined space. The break room that had felt spacious moments ago now seemed designed for exactly 2 people, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body as he reached past her for a coffee mug. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the pot in her hands. "Of course." She poured his coffee first, proud that her hands remained steady despite the way her heart was racing. "Cream? Sugar? Black? Like my soul," according to the business magazines. The unexpected humor made her laugh, a real laugh that bubbled up before she could stop it. "I don't think Business Weekly is known for their psychological profiles." "No, but they do love their dramatic headlines." He took a sip of coffee and studied her over the rim of his mug. "What about you, Ms. Jameson? What brings you in so early?" The question was simple, but something in his tone suggested he was asking about more than just her schedule. Ariel found herself caught between the professional answer she should give and the honest one that was fighting to escape. "I grew up in a house where quiet was rare," she said finally, choosing truth over safety. "My mum worked 2 jobs. My little brother had ADHD, and our neighbor's dog barked at everything that moved. I learned to love the early morning hours because they were the only time that belonged to just me." Damon's expression shifted. something warmer replacing the usual controlled composure. And now? Now I guess old habits die hard. Plus, I like being prepared. Yesterday was, she searched for the right words, intense. Was it? There was something almost teasing in his voice. In what way? The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she should cross. He was her boss's boss's boss. He was Damon Riker, billionaire CEO, a man who lived in a world she'd only read about in magazines. And yet, standing here in the morning light with coffee steam rising between them, he felt dangerously human. It's a lot to take in, she said carefully. The scale of everything here, the responsibility, meeting someone whose business strategies I've studied, but never thought I'd actually encounter in person. Studied. His eyebrows rose. Should I be flattered or concerned? Definitely flattered. Your acquisition of the Detroit waterfront properties was brilliant. You saw potential where everyone else saw problems. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, pleasure, or maybe something deeper. Most people only remember the profit margins from that deal. Profit is important, but vision is everything. You didn't just buy properties, you bought the future of an entire neighborhood. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber through the break room window. Ariel felt something settling between them. Not quite friendship, but not the formal distance of employer and intern either. Can I ask you something? Damon's voice was quieter now, more personal. Of course. What made you choose Tiburon for your internship? I know we're not your only option. Henderson and Associates offered you a position. So did Morrison Financial. Ariel's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. How do you know that? I make it my business to know about exceptional candidates, especially ones who turn down higher salaries to work here. The admission sent a warm flutter through her chest. He'd researched her background, paid attention to her choices. It should have felt invasive, but instead it felt like recognition, like someone finally seeing her worth. Henderson and Associates would have had me filing papers and fetching coffee for 6 months, she said honestly. Morrison Financial offered good money, but no real learning opportunities. Tiburon, she met his eyes directly. Tiburon would challenge me, push me to grow, and working with the best means becoming better, even if the best can be demanding, unforgiving, especially then. Her voice gained strength. I didn't come this far to play it safe, Mr. Riker. The smile that spread across his face was different from yesterday's brief expression, warmer, more genuine, tinged with something that looked almost like admiration. I think, he said slowly, that you're going to surprise a lot of people here, Ariel Jameson. The use of her first name sent electricity down her spine. Not Ms. Jameson, the formal intern. Ariel, like she was real to him, like she mattered. Before she could respond, voices echoed from the elevator bank. The rest of the world was waking up, and their private moment was about to end. I should get back to work, Damon said, but he made no immediate move to leave. Of course. Ariel set down her mug, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest. He paused at the doorway and looked back at her. Same time tomorrow? The question was casual, but there was nothing casual about the way he asked it, or the way her pulse jumped in response. I'll be here, she replied, and immediately wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Ariel remained in the break room, staring at the sunrise and trying to convince herself that sharing coffee with Damon Riker was just a coincidence. But deep down, she already knew that some coincidences were really choices in disguise. 3 weeks of 7 a.m. coffee, and Damon Riker was beginning to realize he had a problem. He stood outside the conference room, watching through the glass walls as Ariel presented her market analysis to the development team. She'd traded her nervous first-day energy for confident professionalism, but he could still see the careful way she chose her words, the subtle steel beneath her gentle demeanor. She was explaining the demographic shifts in the Portland market, using charts she'd created herself, and every person in that room was hanging on her every word, including him. Especially him. Sir? His assistant Cameron appeared at his elbow with a concerned expression. The Morrison meeting is in 5 minutes. Damon forced himself to look away from the conference room. Right. Morrison. But as he walked toward his office, his mind wasn't on real estate mogul Harrison Morrison or the multi-million-dollar deal they were about to discuss. Instead, he was thinking about the way Ariel had laughed that morning when he'd told her about his disastrous attempt to make breakfast for himself. You burned oatmeal? She'd asked, eyes dancing with amusement. Apparently, adding water is more complicated than it sounds. Mr. Riker, You run $1 billion company, but you can't make oatmeal? I have people for oatmeal, Ms. Jameson. The memory of her laughter followed him into his office, where Harrison Morrison was already waiting, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate magazine. Damon! Harrison stood, extending his hand. Good to see you. I trust you're ready to talk about the Seattle project. Of course. Damon shook his hand and gestured toward the sitting area. Can I offer you anything? Coffee? I'm fine, thanks. I want to get straight to business. Harrison settled into the leather chair with the confidence of a man used to getting his way. I've reviewed your proposal for the Seattle waterfront development. Impressive work. Thank you. There's just one small issue. Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. My sources tell me the market analysis was done by some intern, a college student. Damon, surely you understand why that concerns me. Something cold settled in Damon's chest. The analysis was thorough and accurate. I'm sure it was adequate for practice, but we're talking about a $200 million investment. I need assurance that your senior team is handling the real work. The dismissive tone made Damon's jaw tighten. That college student identified market opportunities that our senior analysts missed. Her recommendations could increase project profitability by 15%. Damon, I respect your mentoring efforts, but let's be realistic. Experience matters. Pedigree matters. I can't take risks on amateur work, no matter how enthusiastic. Amateur? Damon stood slowly, his voice deadly quiet. Harrison, that amateur has more insight into urban development patterns than most people with 20 years of experience. Harrison held up his hands in a placating gesture. I'm not trying to insult anyone. I'm sure she's a lovely girl, but this is business, not charity. The words lovely girl hit Damon like a physical blow. The casual dismissal, the assumption that Ariel's worth could be reduced to her appearance, the implication that her hiring was somehow an act of charity rather than recognition of exceptional talent. You know what, Harrison? Damon's voice carried the kind of quiet intensity that made boardrooms go silent. I think we're done here. Excuse me? The deal's off. Tiburon Holdings won't be partnering with Morrison Financial on this project. Harrison's face flushed red. You're walking away from a $200 million deal because I questioned your intern's qualifications? I'm walking away because you don't recognize talent when it's presented to you. And frankly, that makes you a poor business partner. This is insane, Damon, over some girl. Get out. The words came out low and dangerous. Get out of my office before I have security escort you out. Harrison Morrison left, muttering about emotional decisions and poor judgment, but Damon barely heard him. He stood at his office window, hands clenched into fists, trying to understand what had just happened. He'd never walked away from a deal over personnel decisions, never let emotions override business logic, never cared enough about someone's feelings to sacrifice profit margins, but the thought of Harrison Morrison dismissing Ariel as some girl had made him see red. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Ariel appeared in his doorway looking concerned. Mr. Riker, Cameron said you might need these Portland projections, but if this is a bad time... She was holding a folder, her dark eyes searching his face with that careful attention she gave everything important. No, he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. Come in. She approached slowly, setting the folder on his desk. Is everything okay? You seem tense. The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid him. When was the last time someone had asked if he was okay? When had anyone cared enough to notice his mood? Just business complications, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. The Morrison deal. He looked at her sharply. How did you... I saw him leave. He looked angry. She hesitated, then said quietly, was it about my analysis? The fact that she'd immediately assumed responsibility, that she was prepared to take blame for his decision, made something twist painfully in his chest. Ariel. He stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerable expression on her face. The Morrison deal fell through because Harrison Morrison is an arrogant fool who can't recognize exceptional work when it's handed to him on a silver platter. But if my analysis wasn't up to standard, your analysis was perfect, better than perfect. It was innovative and insightful, and exactly what this company needs. He found himself standing close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Don't you dare apologize for being brilliant. She looked up at him with something like wonder. You really think it was good? I think, he said slowly, that you're going to revolutionize how this industry approaches market analysis. And Harrison Morrison just lost the chance to be part of that. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with something that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way she was looking at him, like he was someone worth believing in. "Mr. Riker," her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes? Thank you for defending my work, for believing in me. Always," he replied, and meant it with a certainty that terrified him. She smiled then, not the careful professional smile she wore in meetings, but something genuine and radiant that made his world tilt sideways. And as she left his office, Damon Riker realized that somewhere between morning coffee and market analyses, he'd started breaking the most important rule he'd ever made. He just wasn't sure if he cared anymore. The power outage hit at exactly 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday, trapping them between the 31st and 32nd floors. Ariel had been reviewing quarterly reports when the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow, and then she heard it, the soft mechanical groan of elevators grinding to a halt. She gathered her papers and headed for the stairs, but as she passed the executive elevator bank, she heard a familiar voice from behind the closed doors. "This is Damon Riker. I'm trapped in elevator car 7. How long before you can restore power?" Her heart lurched. Without thinking, she pressed the emergency call button on the wall panel. "Mr. Riker, it's Ariel. Are you okay?" A pause. Then, "Ariel, what are you still doing here?" "Working late. The security guard says the power's out for 6 city blocks. Could be hours before it's restored." Another pause. Longer this time. When his voice came through the speaker again, it carried a note she'd never heard before, something almost vulnerable. "Well, this is a first. Damon Riker brought low by a power grid. Despite the situation, she smiled. Even billionaires can't control the electrical company, I guess. Don't tell the business magazines. They'll write articles about my declining influence." The joke was so unexpected that she laughed, and she heard an answering chuckle from inside the elevator. It occurred to her that this might be the first real conversation they'd had where neither of them was performing. No corporate mask, no professional distance, just two people talking in the dark. "Are you claustrophobic?" she asked, suddenly concerned. "No. Are you planning to join me in here? The stairs are right there. I could leave you to contemplate your empire in solitude." "Please don't." The words came out quickly, almost before he could stop them. "I mean, the company would be appreciated." Something in his tone made her decision easy. She found the elevator maintenance panel, and after 15 minutes of patient work and a few choice words that would have shocked her economics professor, she managed to manually open the doors just enough to slip through the gap. The elevator car was dimmer than the hallway, lit only by the faint glow of emergency power. Damon sat on the floor with his back against the wall, his usually perfect suit jacket draped beside him, his tie loosened, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "My hero," he said as she settled across from him, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "Though I should point out that now we're both trapped, sometimes the best solutions involve shared problems." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the corporate world reduced to a small metal box suspended between floors. Outside, the city was probably in chaos. Traffic lights dark, buildings powerless, thousands of people dealing with the unexpected disruption. But in here, everything felt strangely peaceful. "Can I ask you something?" Damon's voice was quieter now, more personal. "Of course. Why did you really choose Tiburon? And don't give me the answer you gave in your interview. I want the truth." Ariel considered lying, giving him something safe and professional. But the darkness made honesty easier somehow, like confessing to shadows. "Because I read an article about you 5 years ago. Forbes, I think. They were calling you ruthless, saying you'd built your empire by crushing smaller companies." She met his eyes in the dim light. "But buried in all that criticism was one paragraph about how you'd refused to demolish a community center in Detroit. The journalist treated it like a business mistake, but I saw it differently." "How?" "I saw someone who understood that success without soul is just expensive emptiness." She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "I wanted to work for someone who knew the difference." Damon was quiet for so long that she wondered if she'd said too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough around the edges. "That community center cost me $12 million in projected profits. And how much did keeping it earn you in respect from that neighborhood? That's not how business works, Ariel. Maybe it should be." Another silence, this one charged with something she couldn't name. In the emergency lighting, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes were soft when they met hers. "You have an unusual way of seeing the world," he said finally. "My grandmother used to say, that the most important things can't be counted on balance sheets. Love, respect, integrity. They don't show up in quarterly reports, but they're what make life worth living. She sounds wise. She was. She raised me after my parents died, worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, but never let me forget that wealth without character is just elaborate poverty. The admission hung between them like a bridge. She'd never told anyone at Tiburon about her background, about growing up poor, about the nights when dinner was crackers and determination. "How old were you?" Damon asked gently. 12, car accident. One day I had this perfect little family, and the next—" She shrugged, trying to make it seem casual. "Grandma used to say that God never gives us more than we can carry, but sometimes I think he overestimated my strength." "You carried it," Damon said quietly. "You're here. You survived. You're thriving. Some days—" She looked at him curiously. "What about you? What made Damon Riker who he is?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, almost reluctantly, "My father was a construction worker. Good man. Terrible with money. We lost our house when I was 16. Had to move in with my uncle, who made sure I understood that charity came with conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that teach you never to depend on anyone else for anything that matters." His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. "I swore I'd never be vulnerable like that again. Never let anyone have that kind of power over my life." "And have you succeeded?" He looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "Until recently, I thought so." The words created a tension that seemed to fill the small space between them. Ariel felt her pulse quicken, aware suddenly of how close they were, how intimate this accidental confinement had become. "Mr. Riker, Damon." His voice was rough. "In here in the dark, just Damon." "Damon," she said softly, testing the name on her tongue. "Are you saying that something's changed?" He leaned forward slightly, and she could see the conflict playing across his features, want and restraint warring in his dark eyes. "I'm saying," he said quietly, "that I used to know exactly who I was and what I wanted. And then you walked into my building and smiled at me, and suddenly all my certainties feel like suggestions." The admission stole her breath. This was dangerous territory, the kind of conversation that could change everything between them. She should deflect, make a joke, remind them both of the professional boundaries they were dancing around. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "What kind of suggestions?" "The kind that make me think maybe some rules are meant to be broken." The elevator shuddered slightly, and somewhere in the distance, they heard the hum of power being restored. Soon the doors would open, and they'd return to their separate worlds, CEO and intern, untouchable billionaire and scholarship student. But for this moment, suspended between flaws and possibilities, they were just Damon and Ariel, 2 people who'd found something unexpected in the darkness, and neither of them was quite ready to step back into the light. She knew everything had changed the moment she walked into the break room and found it empty. For 6 weeks, 7 a.m. coffee had been their unspoken ritual. But this morning, the morning after the elevator, after confessions in the dark, after maybe some rules are meant to be broken, Damon was nowhere to be found. Ariel poured herself coffee with hands that trembled slightly, telling herself it didn't matter, that she hadn't spent the entire night replaying every word, every look, every moment, when the space between them had felt charged with possibility. "You're here early." Cassidy's voice made her jump, sloshing coffee onto the counter. "So are you," Ariel replied, grabbing paper towels to clean up the mess. "Client presentation at 8. You?" "Just couldn't sleep." Cassidy studied her with sharp eyes. "This wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that you and our illustrious CEO were trapped in an elevator together for 3 hours yesterday, would it?" Ariel's head snapped up. "How did you—" "Security logs, honey. Everything that happens in this building gets recorded somewhere." Cassidy leaned against the counter, her expression curious but not unkind. "Want to talk about it?" "There's nothing to talk about. We were stuck. We waited. The power came back on. End of story." "Uh-huh." Cassidy's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. "And that's why you look like you haven't slept, and he's been hiding in his office since dawn, refusing to take calls." "He's hiding?" The words slipped out before Ariel could stop them, and Cassidy's eyebrows rose knowingly. Interesting reaction from someone who has nothing to talk about. She softened slightly. "Look, I like you, Ariel. You're smart, you're genuine, and you actually make this place better. But Damon Riker is—" She searched for words. "Complicated. Rich, powerful men like him don't end up with women like us. They end up with society princesses and business heiresses, women who match their tax brackets." The words hit harder than they should have, probably because they echoed Ariel's own fears. I'm not trying to end up with anyone. I'm here to work. I know. That's what makes this dangerous. Cassidy's voice was gentle but firm. Because you're not playing games or chasing his money. You're just being yourself. And apparently that's kryptonite to a man who's spent his whole life around people who want something from him. Before Ariel could respond, the break room door opened and Cameron appeared, looking harried. Ariel, Mr. Riker wants to see you in his office now. The walk to the executive floor felt endless. Ariel's mind raced through possibilities. Was he going to pretend last night never happened? Transfer her to a different department? Fire her for inappropriate workplace behavior? Cameron knocked and opened the door without waiting for a response. She's here, sir. Damon stood with his back to the room, staring out at the city skyline. He was wearing his armor again. Perfect suit, perfect posture, every inch the untouchable CEO. But Ariel could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched behind his back. Close the door, he said without turning around. The soft click seemed to echo in the silence. Ariel waited, studying the rigid line of his spine, the careful distance he was maintaining. I've been thinking about last night, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. So have I. He turned then, and she saw something almost like pain flash across his features before the mask slipped back into place. It was a mistake, he said quietly. The conversation, the intimacy. I crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. Each word felt like a small blow, but Ariel kept her expression neutral. I see. You're an intern. I'm the CEO. What happened in that elevator was inappropriate, and it won't happen again. What exactly do you think happened in that elevator, Mr. Riker? The formal address was deliberate, a shield against the hurt blooming in her chest. We got carried away. The situation, the darkness, being trapped together, it created a false sense of intimacy. But that's all it was. False. False. She repeated the word like she was testing its weight. So when you told me about your father, about losing your house, about learning never to be vulnerable, that was false. A muscle in his jaw ticked. That was an error in judgment. And when I told you about my parents, about my grandmother, about growing up poor, was that false too? Ariel, was it false when you said I made all your certainties feel like suggestions? Her voice was rising despite her efforts to control it. Or are you just deciding it was false now because it's easier? Because it's necessary. The words exploded out of him, raw and honest. Because I can't, we can't, this can't happen. Why? She stepped closer, drawn by the crack in his composure. Give me one real reason why. Because I'm 37 years old and you're 24. Because I sign your paychecks. Because I have more money than most small countries and you're worried about student loans. Because you're scared. The words hung between them like a challenge. Damon's eyes flashed with something dangerous. I don't get scared, Ms. Jameson. Everyone gets scared. The question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. They stared at each other across the expanse of his office, the air crackling with tension and unspoken truths. Ariel could see the war playing out in his expression. Want versus control, feeling versus logic. The man he'd been in the elevator versus the CEO he thought he had to be. You want to know what scares me? His voice was low, dangerous. It's the way you look at me like I'm worth believing in. It's how you make me want things I swore I'd never want. It's that for the first time in 20 years, I met someone who makes me want to be better than I am. The confession hit her like a physical force, but before she could respond, he was moving away, putting distance between them again. But wanting something and being able to have it are two different things. I won't destroy your career for my feelings, and I won't risk everything I've built for what? She interrupted. For love? For connection? For the chance to be happy? For something that can't last. His voice was final, defeated. Because men like me don't get fairy tale endings, Ariel. We get hostile takeovers and merger negotiations and board meetings. Not love. Never love. The resignation in his voice broke something inside her. This wasn't rejection. It was surrender. He wasn't choosing not to care about her. He was choosing not to fight for something he wanted because he didn't believe he deserved it. You're wrong, she said softly. Am I? Yes. Because fairy tales aren't about princes in castles. They're about people brave enough to believe that happy endings are possible. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. I thought you were that brave. I guess I was wrong. She left him standing there, surrounded by all the trappings of his success. And for the first time since she'd started at Tiburon Holdings, Ariel wondered if some dreams were too dangerous to chase. But as the elevator carried her down to reality, She couldn't shake the memory of his voice in the darkness, saying her name like a prayer. And she couldn't help wondering if the man who'd built an empire from nothing might find the courage to fight for something that could actually make him happy. The error that changed everything was exactly 12 numbers in the wrong order. Ariel stared at her computer screen in horror, her coffee growing cold as she realized what she'd done. The Portland market analysis, the one she'd been perfecting for weeks, the one that was supposed to be presented to the board in 2 hours, contained a transposition that made the profit projections completely wrong, not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. Her hands shook as she recalculated the figures, hoping against hope that she'd made a mistake in discovering her mistake. But no, she'd somehow switched 2 key demographic data points, and the error cascaded through every projection, every recommendation, every carefully crafted conclusion. No, 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 she whispered, frantically trying to figure out how to fix 6 weeks of work in less than 2 hours. Talking to yourself now? Cassidy appeared beside her desk, then stopped when she saw Ariel's face. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I've seen my career ending. Ariel's voice was barely controlled. I made an error in the Portland analysis. A huge one, the kind that makes the company look incompetent and costs millions of dollars. How huge? The kind where they'll question whether hiring me was the worst decision Tiburon Holdings ever made. Cassidy leaned over to look at the screen, her expression growing more concerned as she absorbed the scope of the problem. Okay, this is significant, but maybe we can fix it. Let me call the IT department, see if they can delay the board presentation. No, Ariel closed her laptop with a decisive snap. I made this mistake. I have to fix it, and I have to tell Mr. Riker before he walks into that boardroom and humiliates himself with my incompetence. The walk to the executive floor felt like climbing a mountain. Every step carried the weight of disappointment, not just her own, but his. After everything that had happened between them, after he'd defended her work to Harrison Morrison, after he'd called her brilliant, she was about to prove that his faith in her had been misplaced. Cameron looked up as she approached. I'm sorry, but Mr. Riker is in prep for the board meeting. He can't be disturbed. This is about the board meeting. Please, it's urgent. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Cameron picked up his phone. Sir, Ariel Jameson is here. She says it's urgent about the Portland presentation. A pause. Yes, sir. He hung up and nodded toward the office. Go ahead. Damon was standing behind his desk, reviewing notes, when she entered. He looked up with the same carefully neutral expression he'd worn for the past week. Polite, professional, distant. But she caught a flicker of something else in his eyes, before the mask slipped back into place. What's wrong? He asked, and his immediate assumption that something was wrong made her chest tighten. There's an error in the Portland analysis. She forced herself to meet his eyes. A significant one. I transposed 2 data points, and it affected all the projections. Damon set down his papers slowly. How significant? The profit margins are wrong by approximately 30%. The timeline recommendations are based on faulty demographic assumptions. The entire presentation is, she swallowed hard, unusable. The silence that followed felt endless. She watched him process the information, saw the moment when the full implications hit him. In 2 hours, he was supposed to present her research to the board of directors. Research that would now make him look either incompetent or poorly prepared. I see, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. I take full responsibility. I know this reflects badly on your judgment in hiring me, and I'm prepared to resign if that's what's best for the company. Resign? Something sharp flashed in his eyes. You think I'd fire you over a mistake? It's not just a mistake. It's the kind of error that costs companies millions and ruins reputations. Your reputation. Damon moved around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. Ariel, look at me. Reluctantly, she lifted her eyes to his. Have you eaten today? The question was so unexpected that she blinked. What? Food? When did you last eat something? Yesterday, I think. I've been working on this presentation, trying to make it perfect, and I guess I forgot. You forgot to eat. His voice carried a note she couldn't identify. When did you last sleep? Really sleep, not just collapse at your desk. That's not relevant. It's completely relevant. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face with concern that felt dangerously personal. You've been pushing yourself to exhaustion, trying to prove you deserve to be here. That's why you made the error. That's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's a reason. And there's a difference. His voice gentled. Ariel, everyone makes mistakes. Even brilliant people, especially brilliant people who work themselves to the point of collapse, trying to be perfect. The kindness in his voice was harder to bear than anger would have been. But the board meeting will be postponed. I'll tell them we discovered an opportunity to refine our projections and want to present the most accurate data possible. They'll know something's wrong. They'll know we're thorough, which, considering the alternative is presenting flawed data, is exactly what they should know. She stared at him, trying to understand. You're not angry. I'm concerned. About you. About the fact that you've been working 18-hour days and forgetting to take care of yourself. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. About the fact that you thought I'd destroy your career over an honest mistake. Most bosses would. I'm not most bosses. The words came out rougher than he'd intended, at least not when it comes to you. The admission hung between them like a confession. For a moment, the careful distance he'd maintained since the elevator conversation cracked, and she caught a glimpse of the man who'd shared his fears with her in the dark. Why? She whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him fighting with himself, wrestling with words that wanted to escape. Because, he said finally, watching you torture yourself over this mistake is making me realize that I care more about your well-being than any business presentation, because the thought of you thinking I'd throw you away over an error that could happen to anyone makes me physically ill. Because, he stopped, running a hand through his hair, destroying his perfect composure. Because what? She pressed. Because I've been trying for a week to convince myself that what I feel for you isn't real, and this, seeing you in distress, wanting to fix it more than I want to fix the business problem, proves that I'm failing miserably. The confession hit her like lightning. Damon, go home, he said abruptly, stepping back as if he'd revealed too much. Get some sleep. Eat something. We'll fix the analysis tomorrow, together. I can't leave. I need to... You need to take care of yourself. That's not a request, it's an order from your boss. She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was hitting her now that the adrenaline was fading. What about the board? Let me worry about the board. You worry about getting some rest. As she headed toward the door, he called her name softly. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Ariel, for what it's worth, you're the last person I'd ever want to lose. Mistake or no mistake. She left him standing there, surrounded by the expensive trappings of his success, and realized that somewhere between the elevator and this moment, they'd both stopped pretending that this was just about business. The question now was whether either of them would be brave enough to do something about it. The rain was falling hard enough to drown out everything else when Ariel's phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. She'd been lying in her small studio apartment, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events. The mistake, Damon's unexpected kindness, the way he'd looked at her when he said she was the last person he'd ever want to lose. Sleep felt impossible when her mind kept circling back to that moment, to the crack in his voice, to the confession that hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. The text message was from a number she didn't recognize. This is Damon. I know it's late, but I couldn't stop thinking about today. Are you okay? Her heart hammered as she stared at the screen. He'd somehow gotten her personal number, which meant he'd gone looking for it, which meant he'd been thinking about her too. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, I'm fine, just couldn't sleep. His reply came immediately. Neither could I. I keep thinking about what you said, about brave enough to believe happy endings are possible. The rain intensified outside her window, creating a cocoon of sound that made the night feel separate from the rest of the world. She found herself typing before she could second-guess herself. And what conclusion did you reach? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. When his message finally came through, it was longer than she'd expected. That I've spent so long protecting myself from getting hurt that I forgot what it felt like to actually live. That watching you blame yourself today made me realize I'd rather risk everything than keep pretending I don't care about you. That maybe some rules exist to be broken. Ariel stared at the message until her eyes blurred. This was dangerous territory. Texting her boss at midnight, confessions delivered through phone screens, the careful boundaries of their professional relationship dissolving with each exchanged word. Her phone buzzed again. I'm sorry, this is inappropriate. I shouldn't have... Don't, she typed quickly. Don't apologize for being honest. Then let me be completely honest. I can't stop thinking about you. About us. About what might be possible if I were brave enough to try. The confession stole her breath. She could picture him in his penthouse apartment, probably standing at those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the same storm that was rattling her smaller windows 40 floors below. "What's stopping you?" she sent back. "Fear that I'll hurt you. Fear that I'll hurt us both. Fear that men like me don't get to have what we want. We just get what we take." The vulnerability in his words made her chest ache. "What if you're wrong? What if men like you deserve happiness just like everyone else? Do you really believe that?" "I believe that the man who held my hand in an elevator and told me about his father deserves everything good in the world. I believe that the man who defended my work to Harrison Morrison and took care of me today when I made a mistake is worth taking risks for." Her phone rang before she could send another message. His name appeared on the screen, and for a moment she just stared at it, knowing that answering would change everything between them. She answered. "Hi." His voice was rough, intimate in the darkness. "Hi," she whispered back. "I couldn't keep typing. I needed to hear your voice." The simple admission sent warmth flooding through her. "I'm glad you called. Are you really okay, after today?" "I should be asking you that question. I'm the one who almost destroyed your board presentation." "Ariel." The way he said her name made her stomach flutter. "The presentation doesn't matter. You matter. Your well-being matters. Everything else is just business." "That's not very CEO-like of you." "I'm discovering that when it comes to you, I'm not very good at being just a CEO." Thunder rolled overhead, and she heard the same storm through his phone, connecting them across the distance between their different worlds. "Where are you?" she asked softly. "My apartment. Standing at the window, watching the rain and thinking about how you looked today when you thought I was going to fire you." "How did I look?" "Terrified, but ready to face the consequences anyway. Brave even when you were scared." His voice dropped lower. "It made me want to protect you from everything, including myself." "What if I don't want to be protected from you?" The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and danger. "Ariel," he said finally, "if we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. Everything changes. Maybe everything needs to change. You could lose your job, your reputation. People will say terrible things about you, about us. They'll assume, let them assume." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I know who I am. I know why I'm here. And I know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with your money or your position or your power. What does it have to do with? The way you listen when I talk. The way you see potential in people others overlook. The way you carry yourself like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, but you'd never let anyone else feel that burden." She paused, gathering courage for the next words. "The way you make me believe that fairy tales might be real after all." When he spoke again, his voice was raw with emotion. "I've never wanted anything the way I want you. It terrifies me." "Good. Terror means it matters." Another rumble of thunder, closer this time. "I should let you sleep," he said, but made no move to hang up. "I should let you go," she agreed, equally reluctant. "Ariel?" "Yes, tomorrow. When we see each other tomorrow, I don't think I'll be able to pretend anymore." Her pulse quickened. "Pretend what? That you're just my intern. That I don't want to touch you, talk to you, be near you every moment of every day. That I'm not completely, hopelessly falling for you." The confession hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. "Then don't pretend," she whispered, "even if it changes everything?" "Especially if it changes everything." After they hung up, Ariel lay in the darkness, listening to the storm and thinking about tomorrow, about walking into that building knowing that everything between them had shifted, about the moment when Damon Riker would stop being just her boss and become something infinitely more dangerous. 40 floors above, Damon stood at his window and watched the rain wash the city clean, thinking about a woman who'd made him believe that some risks were worth taking. And for the first time in 20 years, he was ready to find out if his heart was as strong as his business instincts. The building felt different when she walked in that morning, like the storm had washed away more than just yesterday's heat. Ariel arrived at 7:30, later than usual, but still before most of the staff. She'd barely slept after their phone call, every nerve ending alive with anticipation and terror about what the day would bring. Her reflection in the elevator doors showed a woman on the edge of transformation, the same pressed blouse and careful makeup, but something indefinably different in her eyes. The 20th floor was quiet, bathed in the gentle light of a post-storm morning. She made coffee with shaking hands, hyper-aware of every sound, every footstep in the hallway, every chime of the elevator that might announce his arrival. She didn't have to wait long. He appeared in the break room doorway at exactly 8 o'clock, and the sight of him stole her breath. He looked like he'd slept as poorly as she had, his usually perfect composure slightly frayed, his dark eyes holding an intensity that made her pulse race. "Good morning," he said softly. and even those simple words carried weight. "Good morning." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. They stood there for a moment, the coffee maker gurgling between them, both remembering the confessions that had spilled out in the darkness. In daylight, surrounded by the familiar trappings of their professional world, everything felt more real and more impossible at the same time. "How did you sleep?" he asked, moving into the small space. "I didn't." The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. "You?" "The same." He reached for a mug, his hand brushing hers as she handed him the coffee pot. The brief contact sent electricity up her arm, and she saw his breath catch. "Ariel, Mr. Riker." Cassidy's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She appeared in the doorway, took in the scene with sharp eyes, and Ariel saw the exact moment when she understood what she was witnessing. "I'm sorry to interrupt. The Morrison people are here for the 9 o'clock. Damon's expression shifted, the mask of professional control sliding back into place, but not before Ariel caught the frustration that flashed across his features. "Morrison?" he said carefully. "I thought we were done with that partnership. Apparently Harrison Morrison has some new proposal. He's quite insistent about meeting with you personally." Cassidy's tone was neutral, but her gaze flicked meaningfully between them. "Should I tell him you're not available?" "No." Damon set down his coffee with deliberate precision. "I'll handle Morrison. Schedule the Portland board meeting for this afternoon. We'll have the corrected analysis ready by then." As Cassidy left, the intimate moment shattered. Damon turned back to Ariel and she could see him rebuilding his walls in real time. "We should," he began. "Get back to work," she finished, understanding the unspoken message. "Of course." But as she started to leave, he caught her wrist gently. The touch was brief, barely there, but it sent fire through her veins. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his thumb brushing across her pulse point before he released her. "Tonight, after the board meeting, we need to talk." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and escaped to her desk where she spent the morning trying to focus on data analysis while her mind replayed the feeling of his hand on her skin. The board meeting was scheduled for 4 o'clock. At 3:45, Ariel knocked on Damon's office door with the corrected Portland analysis and a heart full of hope. "Come in," his voice called, but when she entered, she found him standing rigid behind his desk, his face a mask of cold fury. "Is everything okay?" she asked, setting the folder down carefully. "Harrison Morrison has made a very interesting offer," Damon said, his voice deadly quiet. "He wants to partner with Tiburon on the Seattle project after all. Apparently he's had a change of heart about our analytical capabilities. That's good news?" He specifically mentioned being impressed by our intern's work, said he'd heard she was quite talented. The way Damon said the word made her stomach drop. He also mentioned that he understood why I might be personally invested in defending her contributions. The implication hit her like a physical blow. "He thinks that we're involved." "Yes." Damon's eyes were ice. "He thinks I'm sleeping with my intern, and that's why I defended your analysis and walked away from his original offer. But that's not, isn't it?" His voice cut through her protest. "Because last night I told you I was falling for you. This morning I could barely keep my hands off you in the break room, and now Morrison thinks he can leverage what he perceives as my weakness to get a better deal." The words stung, but it was the way he said weakness that really hurt. Like caring for her was something shameful, something that compromised him. "So what are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying that this is exactly what I was afraid of. People are already talking, already making assumptions. Your reputation is being damaged and mine—" He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. "I can't let this continue." "Let what continue?" "This. Us. Whatever this is between us." He moved to the window, putting distance between them. "I should never have called you last night. Should never have crossed that line." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't you dare pretend that last night didn't mean anything. Don't pretend that what's happening between us is just some inconvenient complication. Isn't it?" He turned back to her, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her. "Look what's happened already. One conversation with Morrison, and suddenly your professional integrity is in question. People think you're sleeping your way to success. How long before that follows you wherever you go? I don't care what people think. You should care." His voice rose, raw with emotion. "Because I care. Because the thought of your name being whispered in boardrooms, of people reducing everything you've accomplished to some sordid office affair, makes me sick. And the thought of walking away from something real, because you're afraid of gossip, makes me sick too." She stepped closer, refusing to let him retreat. What we have isn't sordid, Damon. It's not dirty or wrong or shameful. It's real and it's honest, and it's the best thing that's happened to either of us. It's impossible, but his voice cracked on the word. No, it's not. It's just scary, and you're letting fear make your decisions instead of courage. They stared at each other across the expanse of his office, the air thick with everything they weren't saying. Ariel could see the war playing out in his expression. Love versus logic, want versus responsibility. The man who'd called her at midnight versus the CEO who thought he had to choose between her and everything he'd built. "I won't be the reason you lose everything," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "But I won't pretend I don't love you either." The confession hung between them like a bomb waiting to explode. "Ariel, I love you," she repeated, stronger this time. "Not your money, not your power, not your position. You, the man who holds elevators for scared interns and calls when he can't sleep and believes that people deserve second chances." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The question is whether you love yourself enough to believe you deserve to be happy." She left him standing there, surrounded by all the symbols of his success, and walked back to her desk to pack up her things. Because if Damon Riker was going to choose fear over love, she wasn't going to make it easy for him. But as the elevator carried her down from the 20th floor, she couldn't help hoping that the man who'd built an empire from nothing might find the courage to fight for something that could actually complete him, even if it took a miracle to make him see it. She was 3 blocks away when he caught up with her. Ariel had made it to the sidewalk, her small box of personal items clutched against her chest, before the tears finally came. The afternoon rush hour swirled around her, business people hurrying to meetings, tourists snapping photos, the entire city moving at its relentless pace, while her world crumbled in slow motion. She'd meant what she said about not making it easy for him. But walking away from Damon Riker, from the job she'd dreamed of, from the man she'd fallen in love with, was the hardest thing she'd ever done. "Ariel!" His voice cut through the street noise like a lifeline. She turned to see him pushing through the crowd, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect composure completely destroyed. He looked like a man who'd been running, both literally and figuratively. "What are you doing?" she asked as he reached her, breathless and wild-eyed. "Something I should have done the moment Morrison walked into my office." He took the box from her hands, setting it carefully on a nearby bench, then turned back to her with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I'm choosing you. Damon, let me finish. Please." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I spent 20 years building walls to protect myself from exactly this moment. From caring so much about someone that their happiness matters more than my reputation, more than my business, more than my carefully controlled life." Traffic moved around them. Pedestrians shot curious glances their way, but Ariel felt like they were alone in a bubble of possibility. "You were right," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I was letting fear make my decisions. Fear of gossip, fear of vulnerability, fear that men like me don't get fairy tale endings." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she didn't realize had fallen. "But you know what I'm more afraid of? Living the rest of my life without you. What about Morrison? The gossip? People thinking, let them think whatever they want." His voice gained strength. "I know the truth. I know that you're the most brilliant, courageous, genuine person I've ever met. I know that you've made me want to be better than I am. And I know that I love you so much it terrifies and amazes me in equal measure." The confession hit her like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. "You love me? I love you," he repeated, stronger this time. "I love your mind, your heart, your integrity. I love the way you see potential where others see problems. I love that you make me laugh, that you challenge me, that you believe I'm worth saving from myself." He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "I love you enough to risk everything for the chance to build something real with you. Even if it changes everything? Especially because it changes everything." He smiled then, the genuine smile that had stopped her heart that first day in the office. "Besides, what's the point of having power if you don't use it to protect the people you love? What does that mean? It means Harrison Morrison can take his deal and his implications and go to hell. It means I'm going to make sure everyone knows that my personal life has nothing to do with your professional capabilities. It means I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever questions your worth again. Damon, you can't fight the whole world. Watch me." His voice carried the quiet intensity that had built a billion-dollar empire. "I didn't get where I am by backing down from challenges, and you, Ariel Jameson, are the most important challenge I've ever faced. She stared at him, this powerful man who'd stopped traffic to chase after her, who was offering to risk everything he'd built for something that might not work. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. "I'm asking you to take a chance on us. I'm asking you to let me love you properly, openly, without hiding or apologizing." He stepped closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm asking you to marry me." The words hit her like lightning. "What? Not today, not tomorrow, but someday when you're ready. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build something together that's bigger than either of us alone. I want to prove to you every single day that fairy tales are real and love is worth fighting for." "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." His hands slid down to capture hers. "I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. I know that people will say I'm having a midlife crisis, or you're a gold digger, or that we're both insane. But I also know that what we have is real and rare and worth protecting." Ariel looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd conquered boardrooms and built empires, who was now standing on a busy sidewalk, offering her his heart with no guarantees, no contracts, no safety nets. "There's just one problem," she said finally. His face fell. "What?" "I already quit." Dramatically. "Earn front of half the office." She bit her lip, fighting a smile. "How exactly does this work if I'm unemployed?" Relief flooded his features, followed immediately by that devastating smile. "Well, Tiburon Holdings is always looking for exceptional consultants. Someone with your skills could probably name their own salary, work their own hours, report directly to the CEO. That sounds like nepotism. That sounds like recognizing talent and keeping it in the family." He brought her hands to his lips, pressing gentle kisses to her knuckles. "Say yes, Ariel. Say yes to us, to this crazy, impossible love, to believing that sometimes the best things happen when you're brave enough to break all the rules." She looked at him, standing there in his wrinkled suit with his heart on his sleeve, offering her everything she'd never dared to dream of. The practical part of her mind listed all the reasons this was insane: the age difference, the power imbalance, the media attention, the challenges they'd face. But the part of her that had fallen in love with his laugh, his integrity, his quiet strength, the part that had confessed her feelings and walked away rather than settle for less than she deserved, that part knew there was only one answer. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes to us. Yes to this crazy love. Yes to believing in fairy tales." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Yes to you, Damon Riker." He kissed her then, right there on the busy sidewalk, soft and sweet and full of promise. And as the city moved around them, Ariel realized that sometimes the best love stories didn't start in ballrooms or castles. Sometimes they started in coffee rooms and elevators and boardrooms, between two people brave enough to believe that happy endings were possible for anyone willing to fight for them, even billionaire CEOs and scholarship students who learned that the most important rules were the ones written by the heart. 2 years later, she still made coffee at 7 a.m., but now she wasn't alone. Ariel stood at the kitchen island of their penthouse apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber, a simple diamond ring catching the morning light as she reached for 2 mugs. The space was different from Damon's old bachelor pad, warmer, filled with books and plants and photographs that told the story of a life built together rather than accumulated in isolation. "Good morning, Mrs. Riker-to-be." Damon's voice was rough with sleep as his arms circled her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Good morning, Mr. Soon-to-be married to the best consultant in the city," she replied, leaning back against his chest. Modest as always. He pressed a kiss to her neck that made her pulse skip. "Sleep well?" "Eventually. You?" "Better than I have in years. Better than I ever did before you." It was true. The man who'd once survived on 3 hours of sleep and endless cups of black coffee now prioritized rest, proper meals, and mornings that started slowly. Ariel had changed more than his heart. She'd changed his entire approach to living. "The Times review came in," she said, nodding toward the tablet on the counter. "And Riker Holdings' revolutionary approach to sustainable urban development sets new industry standards. Led by visionary consultant Ariel Jameson Riker, the company's Portland project demonstrates that profitable development and community enrichment are not mutually exclusive." She turned in his arms, smiling. "They called our work a masterclass in ethical business practices." "Our work," he repeated, pride evident in his voice. I like the sound of that. 2 years had transformed more than their personal relationship. Ariel's innovative approaches to market analysis, had revolutionized Tiburon Holdings' development strategy. She'd become the youngest senior consultant in the company's history, her methods studied in business schools and her success speaking for itself. The whispers about nepotism had been silenced by results that couldn't be argued with. "Ready for today?" she asked, straightening his tie. "Are we ever really ready for board meetings with your grandmother?" Ariel laughed. "She likes you. She just enjoys making you nervous. She likes that I make you happy. There's a difference." It was true. Grandma Jameson had taken one look at Damon during their first meeting and declared him a good man, trying to figure out how to be better. Then she'd spent the rest of dinner testing his resolve with pointed questions about his intentions and his understanding of what it meant to love a woman who'd been raised to expect respect, not just affection. He'd passed with flying colors. "Besides," Ariel continued, "she's coming to approve the final wedding plans, not to grill you about quarterly projections." "Right. Just the small matter of planning the event that half the business world will be analyzing for social and political implications." They'd decided on a small ceremony, family and close friends only, in the garden of the community center Damon had refused to demolish years ago. The same decision that had first caught Ariel's attention was now hosting their wedding, a perfect circle that felt like destiny. "Having second thoughts?" she asked lightly, though her eyes showed she didn't really believe it. "Never." His voice was firm, certain. "Though I do think about how different everything would be if you hadn't walked into that building 2 years ago." "Different how?" "Emptier, colder, more successful on paper and completely hollow in reality." He cupped her face gently. "You saved me from a life I didn't even realize was killing me." "We saved each other," she corrected. "You taught me that dreams are worth fighting for, that I don't have to make myself smaller to make others comfortable, that love doesn't diminish ambition, it fuels it." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was coming alive. Somewhere down there, young professionals were grabbing coffee before heading to jobs they hoped would change their lives. Somewhere, someone was taking a chance on love, on dreams, on the possibility that fairy tales could happen to ordinary people. "Do you ever wonder what Harrison Morrison thinks about all this?" Ariel asked, settling into Damon's lap as he sat at their breakfast table. "I know exactly what he thinks. His secretary sent a congratulations card when our engagement was announced. Apparently, he'd like to discuss mutually beneficial partnerships now that he understands our business model." "So, did you respond?" "I sent him a very polite letter explaining that Tiburon Holdings doesn't partner with companies that mistake personal integrity for professional weakness." Damon's smile was sharp. "I may have also mentioned that his loss of the Portland contract directly contributed to our most profitable quarter in company history." Diplomatic as always. "I learned from the best consultant in the business." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise and thinking about the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy, building a relationship under media scrutiny, navigating corporate politics, proving that their success was based on merit rather than romance. But every challenge had made them stronger, more certain that what they'd found was worth protecting. "Ariel?" Damon's voice was soft, reflective. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in my office, about fairy tales being for people brave enough to believe happy endings are possible?" "I remember. I used to think that was naive, optimistic to the point of foolishness." He traced patterns on her hand, his wedding ring glinting in the morning light. "Now I think it might be the most practical philosophy in the world." "How so?" "Because believing in happy endings gives you the courage to create them, to take risks, to be vulnerable, to choose love over fear." He looked at her with the same intensity that had stopped her heart that first day in the elevator. "You didn't just teach me to believe in fairy tales, you taught me to write my own." "Our own," she corrected, then kissed him with all the love and certainty she felt. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, full of dreamers and deal-makers, lovers and fighters, people searching for their own version of happiness. But inside their penthouse, time moved differently. Here, morning coffee lasted as long as they wanted it to. Here, love was measured not in quarterly reports, but in shared glances and quiet conversations, and the simple miracle of finding someone who made every day feel like the beginning of something beautiful. And as Ariel looked at the man who'd chased her down a busy sidewalk to offer her his heart, she realized that the best fairy tales weren't about princes and castles. They were about two people brave enough to believe that love was worth fighting for, and strong enough to build a happiness that could weather any storm. Some rules, after all, were definitely meant to be broken, especially the ones that said fairy tales only happen to other people. The end. What did you think of Ariel and Damon's love story? Have you ever been brave enough to break the rules for love? Share your thoughts and let us know what resonated with you most about their journey. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.